The rain had finally stopped, but the damp clung to everything in the city of Veridon like a guilty secret. In a fifth-floor walk-up that smelled of old paper and stronger chemicals, Leo traced a line on the drafting table with a hand that didn't tremble, not anymore. The line was a boundary, the edge of a new world. Before him lay not canvas, but a smooth, milky white sheet of polysilk, stretched taut. Arrayed around him were his instruments. Not brushes, but syringes filled with inks that shimmered with internal, engineered light, a box of delicate, razor-tipped styluses, and the console, its screen a cascade of shifting biometric data. Leo was a graphicist. In this age, art had transcended pigment. It was grown, programmed, lived. The inks were nano-suspensions, colonies of phototropic cells waiting for the trigger. The stylus was both scalpel and conductor. And the graphicist was part artist, part composer, part god. His current commission was from a woman named Alara Vance. She had come to his studio a week ago, her eyes holding a quiet, desperate hunger. She didn't want a portrait of her late husband, Marcus. She wanted a memory, a specific one, their last morning together, before the drift ship Aeon left for Proxima Centauri. She had given Leo a small, clear capsule containing a few strands of hair, a flake of skin from an old ledger Marcus kept. Biometric anchors. "I want to feel the sun," she had said, her voice barely a whisper. The sun from that day. And the weight of his hand on mine. I want to walk into that memory and never leave. It was a tall order. Most graphics were ambient, a living mural that changed with the viewer's mood, a wall piece that emitted calming pheromones. Deep dive mnemonics were illegal in 7 systems. The line between art and addiction, between remembrance and imprisonment, was perilously thin. But Leo saw the raw grief in Alara's face, a mirror of his own from years past, and the credit chip she offered would keep the repo men from his door for a year. He took the job. Now, he was deep in the weave. He inserted the capsule into the console. Data spiraled across the screen. Genetic sequences, residual electrical patterns from neural imprints, a ghost of a scent profile, sandalwood and engine grease. Leo began to code, his fingers flying over the haptic interface. He wasn't drawing a scene, he was writing a reality. With a fine-tipped syringe, he deposited a drop of cobalt blue ink onto the polysilk. It didn't spread like normal ink. It pulsed, then sent out tendrils like the roots of a fast-growing plant, following the invisible paths Leo had programmed. He switched to a stylus, its tip glowing faintly. Where he touched the silk, he didn't scratch it, he polarized it. The surface became receptive, a door waiting to be opened. He worked for hours, the city's neon glow seeping around the edges of his blackout blinds. He coded the quality of the light, a gentle, golden hour glow, not from Veridon's pallid sun, but from a younger, kinder star. He programmed the whisper of a breeze, using ink that would vibrate at a specific frequency, generating sub-audible sound waves that the brain would interpret as touch. He mapped the emotional tone, bittersweet, hopeful, laden with unspoken love, using a cocktail of tailored neuropheromones sealed in a delicate, slow-release reservoir at the piece's edge. The central focus was the hands. 2 figures, suggested rather than rendered in full, sitting at a table. Their intertwined hands were to be the anchor point. For this, Leo used the most complex ink, a platinum-infused chrysalis medium. He loaded a syringe with a needle so fine it was nearly invisible. His breath stilled. This was where art became alchemy. He began to build the hands from the subdermal layer up, a lattice of connective tissue, coded from Marcus's DNA. Then, the subtle topography of skin, the faint scar across the knuckle from an old welding accident, a detail Alara had provided, the pattern of pores, the almost imperceptible ridge of a wedding band. He layered warmth into the cells, a gentle 36.7 degrees Celsius, and a faint, rhythmic thrum, a pulse. As he worked on Alara's hand, something shifted. The data from her husband's biometrics was interacting with the polysilk's base layer in an unexpected way. A feedback loop. Faint, ghostly images began to bleed into the edges of the graphic, flashes of steel corridors, the deep, resonant hum of a starship engine, the cold, impersonal gleam of stasis pod lights. Marcus's later memories, clinging to his cells like cosmic radiation. Leo paused, sweat beading on his brow. This was uncharted territory. The memory was contaminated. To continue was to risk grafting the man's death onto the memory of his last living moment. It could be traumatic. It could also be true. A deeper, more complete truth. Was his duty to Alara's requested solace, or to the stark reality of the man whose essence he was weaving? He made his choice. He didn't erase the ghost images. Instead, he isolated them, coding them as a faint, almost subliminal substratum. They would be there, like the distant rumble of a departing train beneath a perfect morning, a shadow of the future already written in the past. He integrated them, making them a part of the memory's foundation, the unspoken truth beneath the spoken goodbye. Finally, he coded the trigger. The graphic would activate not by touch, but by breath. Alara's specific breath pattern, which he had covertly recorded during her visit. It was a security measure, a lock for a very personal heaven, or hell. 3 days later, Alara returned. She looked as if she hadn't slept. Leo had mounted the poly silk in a simple, dark frame. It looked inert, just a sheet of faintly pearlescent material. He didn't explain the technical details, the ghost images, his moral quandary. He simply said, "It's ready. It's keyed to you. Lean close. Breathe on it. Then, step in." Her eyes widened. With a reverence usually reserved for altars, she approached the graphic. She leaned forward, her lips parting. She exhaled, a soft, warm cloud. The graphic woke. The milky surface dissolved. Not like a screen turning on, but like a fog clearing from a window. The golden light spilled out, filling the dim studio. The scent of sandalwood and engine grease, of fresh coffee and morning dew, washed over them. A gentle, warm breeze lifted the hair from Alara's temples. She gasped, a small, broken sound. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of homecoming. She saw the table, a simple wrought iron thing on a stone patio. She saw the curve of a teacup. And she saw their hands, her own and Marcus's, rendered in such hyper-realistic, living detail that she could see the tiny capillaries beneath his skin. The warmth radiated from the piece. The pulse in his thumb beat a slow, steady rhythm against her knuckle. "Oh, Marcus," she breathed. And she stepped forward. Not physically, her body remained in Leo's studio, swaying slightly, but her consciousness, her perceptual self, was pulled into the graphics field. Her eyes lost focus on the room, seeing instead the deep, verdant garden of their old home, hearing the chirp of crickets that had been extinct on Earth for 50 years. She was there. She was back. Leo watched, his artist's eye critical, his human heart aching. He saw the bliss on her face. Then he saw a flicker. A subtle tightening around her eyes. She was sensing it, the subliminal layer. The hum of the starship, the chill in the air that wasn't from the morning. She didn't pull away. She leaned into the memory, her hand rising as if to touch the framed space before her. A single tear traced a path through the golden light reflected on her cheek. She was seeing the whole man, the departure and the journey, the love and the loss, all woven into one perfect, heartbreaking moment. It was more than she asked for. It was what she needed. For an hour, she stood there, trapped in a beautiful yesterday. Leo sat quietly in the corner, observing the graphics performance, noting the stable energy readings, the flawless loop of the memory sequence. He had done it. He had bottled a ghost and given it a house of light and feeling. Eventually, Alara's breath hitched. She blinked, slowly, and the garden faded. The light receded, drawn back into the poly silk, which returned to its dormant, pearlescent state. The studio was just a studio again, cold and smelling of chemicals. She turned to Leo, her face transformed. The desperate hunger was gone, replaced by a profound, weary peace. "It's him," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's really him. And it's everything that came after, too, isn't it? The leaving. You put that in." Leo nodded, unable to lie. It was in the data. It was part of his truth. I couldn't remove it without making the memory a lie. She walked to the graphic, not to enter it again, but to look at its now quiet surface with new understanding. "A lie would have been a cage," she whispered. This is a gift. Thank you." She transferred the credits, and 2 burly men from a secure art transport service came to collect the piece, boxing it in a climate-controlled crate. Alara left with a final, grateful glance. Leo was alone again, with the silence and the lingering scent of another man's memory. He cleaned his tools meticulously, the high of creation ebbing, leaving the familiar hollow behind. He looked at his hands, the hands that could orchestrate light and emotion, that could fool the brain into believing in ghosts. They were just hands. They couldn't build a memory for himself. He had tried, once, in the early, grief-stricken days after his sister's death. The result had been a chaotic, screaming burst of pain that had shorted out his console and left him with a migraine for a week. Some truths, he knew, were too sharp to hold, even in a vessel of light. He walked to the window, pulling aside the blind. Veridon sparkled below, a circuit board of misery and ambition. Down there, people lived and died in flat, two-dimensional lives. In his studio, he could build them doors to other worlds, brief respites from the pain. But he was the doorman, forever on the threshold, never crossing through. He thought of Alara, now in her sterile, luxurious apartment, probably standing before the graphic, breathing life into her ghost once more. She would visit, and visit, each time understanding a little more, feeling the loss a little more acutely, yet somehow, through that very acuity, finding a way to let it settle. The graphic wouldn't cure her grief, it would contextualize it, frame it in gold and warmth and the faint, inevitable hum of goodbye. That was the real art, Leo realized. Not the perfection of the illusion, but the curation of the truth within it. He wasn't just a technician of sensation. He was an archaeologist of the heart, digging through the biometric ruins of a life to find the key emotion, the pivotal moment, and giving it a space to breathe, just for a little while. The hollow in his chest didn't fill, but it changed shape. It became the negative space where his own memories wouldn't, be rendered. And that was okay. His function was to be the empty vessel so others could be full. He turned from the city's glow, back to his empty drafting table. Another client would come soon, with another capsule of hair, another fragment of a life, another heart desperate for a temporary reprieve from time's relentless march. And he would be here, with his syringes and his styluses and his silent understanding, ready to get graphics, to spin their sorrow into something that, for a few precious moments, almost felt like peace. The light he painted for others was the only light that ever stayed in his own perpetually dark room, and for now, that was enough.